A different kind of rules. Without a belief in government, communities would almost certainly develop rules which, at first glance, might resemble what are now called laws. But there would be a fundamental difference. It is both legitimate and useful to write down and publish for all to see statements about the consequences of doing certain things. People in one town may, for example, make it known that if you get caught stealing in their town, you will be subject to forced labor until you pay back your victim threefold what you stole. Or the people of some neighborhood may make it known that if you are caught driving drunk, they will take your car and roll it into the lake. But while such decrees would constitute threats, they would be fundamentally different from what are now called laws for several reasons. The ones actually making the threats, the ones who decided what retribution they personally would feel justified in inflicting on those who harm or endanger their neighbors, would alone bear the responsibility for making and carrying out such threats. Number two, the threats would not require any elections or consensus. One person or 1,000 people jointly could issue a warning in the form of, "If I catch you doing this, then I will do this to you." The threats would not be seen as the will of the people, but only as a statement of the intention of those who actually issued the warning. Number three, the legitimacy of such threats would be judged not by who made the threats, but by whether the threatened consequence is, in the eye of the observer, appropriate for the crime committed. No one would feel any obligation to agree with or abide by such a threat if they deemed it to be unfair or unjustified. Number four, such warnings would not pretend to alter morality or make up any new crimes, or would nor would anyone imagine such warnings to be legitimate simply because they were issued, the way people now view authoritarian laws. Instead, such warnings would simply constitute statements about what those making the threats believe to be justified. Therefore, instead of being in the authoritarian formula of, "We hereby make the following illegal," the warnings would fit this template. "I believe if you do this, I have the right to respond this way." Many people, having been trained into authority worship, will be terrified of such a non-centralized, free-for-all method of human interaction. But what if, the statist will ask, someone writes a threat that says, "If I don't like your religion or your hairstyle or your dietary choices, I will kill you"? Examining that question in the context of a society still suffering from the superstition of authority, and in the context of a society without such a belief, shows just how dangerous the authority superstition really is. It is true that the absence of the belief in government, any individual could threaten violence in unjustified situations. The point is not that everyone will automatically think and behave properly if there are no rulers, but that such malicious tendencies in human beings would be far less dangerous and destructive without the belief in authority to legitimize them. For example, compare what happens when some individuals vehemently oppose alcohol consumption and when authority forbids it. It is possible, if unlikely, that an individual in a stateless society could, on his own, declare, "I consider consuming alcohol to be a sin, and if I find you have been drinking, I'm coming to your house with a gun to straighten you out." Any person who did so would almost certainly be persuaded, if not by polite reasoning, then by threat of retaliatory violence, that he should not carry through on his threat, and should stop making such threats. Obviously, one person could not by himself inflict oppression upon millions of beer drinkers, even among others who also considered drinking alcohol to be a sin. Even if it was the majority, few would feel justified in trying to forcibly impose their view onto others. Whether they recognized that such aggression is unjustified, or whether they were simply scared of what might be done to them if they tried, either way, violent conflict would be avoided. In contrast, suppose a group of people wearing the label of government declared alcohol to be illegal and created a heavily armed gang of enforcers to hunt down in prison and any caught possessing alcohol. Since that actually happened, there's no need to theorize about the results. With the promise of fixing most of society's ills, and with public support, the U.S. ruling class enacted alcohol prohibition in 1920. Alcohol consumption continued, slightly reduced, and there immediately sprang up a black market in alcohol production and distribution. A hugely profitable but illegal market led to violent conflicts, a jump in organized crime and other crime, and widespread corruption in government, as well as brutal attempts to crush the alcohol trade. Seeing the actual results of prohibition, a majority of the people soon opposed it and demanded the repeal of the 18th Amendment, which authorized prohibition at the federal level. And of course, after prohibition ended, all of the related violence, government violence, and private violence ended. In this example, and countless others, it can be seen that left to their own devices, most people will not try to forcibly impose their preferences upon others, but will go out of their way to avoid violent conflicts. However, if there is a government that people can use to coercively inflict their values upon others, they will gladly beg it to do so and feel no shame or guilt for having done so. If every person who made or attempted to enforce a threat or rule, as it might be called, had to take personal responsibility for having done so and had to assume the risk himself, very few people would be so eager to threaten their neighbors. But, given the vehicle of authority, everyone who believes in government threatens all of his neighbors on a regular basis and accepts none of the responsibility and assumes none of the risk for having done so. In short, the belief in authority makes everyone who believes in it into a thug and a coward.